Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and I'm excited to bring to you the first Flashback Friday episode of 2025. And it's a really interesting one, and one that I think is released at just the right time for you to think about the future. And it's because Paul Jarvis is joining me for this Flashback Friday episode. Now, again, this conversation took place in 2019 upon the release of Company of One, which is a fantastic book. And if you have not read it yet, I highly recommend it. But before we get into that conversation where we touch on a variety of things, such as the idea of staying small, which is the next big thing for business, and AI is definitely going to play a role in that, how to balance profitability with sustainability, and of course, the importance of building a business that aligns with your values. We're going to dive into all of that, but first, let's find out what Paul has been doing and has done since our conversation. So since that conversation, Paul really has embodied the principles of that book. He never really strayed from that. But Paul has also co-founded a company, Fathom Analytics, which is a privacy-focused web analytics company. He's done that since our conversation. It is an alternative to traditional tracking tools, really focusing on privacy, giving it priority and compliance with data protection regulations. And I think that's great. I know Paul was talking about that at our various coffees and the kind of things he was looking at doing. He founded that company, but Paul continued to work on his online courses. He was kind of getting more involved with what Fathom was doing in terms of privacy in the digital age. That's an area that he focused on. But I think the most important thing that I can share with you is Paul's retired. Paul sold his half of Fathom Analytics. I'll link to that article in the show notes. And he is retired. He no longer has to work and is not. He's kind of withdrawn from his online presence, which he started to do years ago, but now fully. As a matter of fact, Paul and I are friendly enough. I texted him and said, hey, would you like to do an update interview for this Flashback Friday episode? And he said, no, I'm retired. And that's it. So the end of the journey in that regard is it's done for Paul. He is kind of where a lot of people want to be, especially at his age. He's not as old as I am. He's not as old as probably a lot of people listening to this podcast. And if he is older, then it's something to aspire to. So I encourage you to listen to this conversation that we have now. Paul did not make many podcast appearances in recent years anyway. Pick up the book, read the book, and then take what you get from this conversation in the book and maybe apply it to build your own company of one and maybe put yourself in a position to do what Paul gets to do now, which is whatever he wants. His relationship with time is phenomenal. And I look forward to chatting with him the next time we get a chance to hang out in person. And he now is free to do a lot more of what he wants to do going forward. So without further ado, we're going to move forward into this conversation. Here is my conversation with Paul Jarvis back in 2019 about a company of one. Enjoy. Paul, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me on, even though this is virtual and we were initially going to do it in real life.
It's like, it feels weird to talk to you and not be in the same room, especially since we could have, number one. Yeah. And number two, because with the way my podcast station is set up, is I actually, I'm sitting in this cozy chair with a cup of coffee. And I have my office chair across from me. And I normally envision the person sitting across from me. That could have happened. Number one,
it could.
But number two, I can clearly there's a real possibility that, in fact, the next time we hang out for coffee, you're just going to have to come over here and sit in that chair for a little while, just so sure. I can have that happen.
Exactly.
You are the author of several books, but the one we're going to focus on specifically today is Company of One: Why Staying Small is the Next Big Thing for Business. And I say this to several authors, when I'm going through their books and it's the message really resonates. There's dog-earing happening, but it's really weird when more pages are dog-eared than are not. And that, that is the case with this book. It's one of those books where, especially it's come along at the right time for me, when you're thinking about scaling, and I mean, there are other people that have written about this, like Jeff Goins, who talked to Seth Godin. I'll put this blog post in the show notes where he said, why do you start a business? Oh, I started a business for freedom. He goes, well, it's not necessarily the best reason to start a business, so on and so forth. You actually talk a bit about this in the book, like the idea of having a company of one does provide an element of freedom, but I don't think that's why you would start a company in the first place, right? Like not just to have freedom. I think it's an element of it though, if you're going to stay at this level, right?
For sure. I think the only people that start businesses for freedom are the other people that want to like be on a beach in Thailand with a Mai Tai in one hand and a laptop in the other hand and work the I guess 43 minutes a day and call it a business. I think there's definitely there's definitely a pragmatic element to having a lifestyle business that a lot of lifestyle business owners miss, where your business does need to be focused on generating profit. It does need to be focused on serving a specific audience well enough that they come back or they tell others. So that definitely needs to be part of it. But I think that we can shape and steer our business towards the types of freedom that we want. So after it is generating revenue and we can determine how to make it last for longer than just a little while, then we can kind of make decisions about it that suit us best.
One of the things that I found that keeps creeping in, and it creeps in various ways. I'll get a message of someone saying, "Hey, can you do more articles about this? Or can you do a product about this?" Or you get someone that pays you a compliment on social media, or you see someone else doing something and you're like, "Oh, I should totally do that." That's all the ego, I think, that comes in. It's really the book. Ryan Holiday wrote an entire book about it called "Ego is the Enemy."
Yeah.
Do you think that's one of the reasons when people are starting a business and they're going from, either they're going from their day job to now building a business? Do you think that that's one of the primary reasons where people get caught in this story? Because I think it's largely a story of businesses need to be big. We've got to have, it's all about bigger is the scale as opposed to better is the scale.
Mm-hmm. And I think that they would be synonyms if that was the case, bigger and better.
This is true. But do you think the ego definitely? I mean, that's one of it's the thing that makes imposter syndrome show up too, right?
Well, I think ego's a funny thing because I think we need ego to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we need to believe that we can do something better than that is currently offered in the market. So I think that, well, there's already a ton of business writers, but I think I have something meaningful to share. So my ego tells me that, hey, even though there's a gazillion business books out there, why don't you share yours? Which I think is valid, and I think that's a good use of ego because it serves the audience that I want to hit and the life that I want to have. Where I think it can lead to badness is that when our ego tries to please others more than it tries to please ourselves, it is an issue. So like if I'm at like a dinner party, which you can laugh because I don't really go to dinner parties, but like if I'm at a dinner party and somebody's like, well, what do you do? And we get into a conversation about it and they're like, well, what does your day look like? Or what does your business look like? And I could say like, look, I sit at home in my pants from Costco and I work on the computer by myself all day. And like that doesn't sound that great to a person who may not work for themselves. But if it's like, well, in order for that to sound better, I'd like maybe if I had 1,000 employees or like 8 offices or like I was in 3 countries, like if I say that at a dinner party, then maybe people are going to think like, oh, this person's a big deal. But like, do I really want to run a business that just looks good to other people that isn't taking into account like what I actually want? So I think in that case, ego doesn't really serve us when it's more related to like social stature or opinions of others, where I think opinions of others can be useful, but in that case, I don't think they really are. So I think it always comes down to that. Like, what is my ego serving here? Mm-hmm. Like, is it serving my own happiness or pursuit of happiness? And yeah, that makes sense. Maybe I should exist in this market. But if your ego is to serve other people or their opinions or your social standing, then I don't know. It doesn't always sound like that's the best thing.
Along the way, as you built, a company of one, and during the book, you talk about how I don't think it was something that was initially deliberate, right? Like, was that fair to say? It just kind of, but I don't think you fell into it either, right? Like, can you elaborate on that? Because I think it's kind of like a happy, like a middle path in that sense.
Yeah, so it was like unconscious in the beginning, and then it was conscious, but not a whole lot changed from it.
Right, like a lot of trial and error, right?
Yeah, and so in the beginning, I was like, I love working for myself. I love working with my customers and with my audience. but I don't like managing people. Like I'm a crappy manager. I have had to manage people, and I have had to delegate in my life in many situations. And it's just not enjoyable to me. Like it's not a skill that I want to foster, develop, or use on a daily basis. So I've always been resistant to hiring people because I don't want to promote myself out of a job I like. I like actually doing the work. So I don't want to promote myself out of doing the work to managing people doing the work. And then I would be jealous of them. And then that just seems like a really bad work environment. So I've always kind of pushed against this idea that if your business is successful, you need to grow it larger and you need to have more people and use more resources and all of that. So in the beginning, it was just, I don't like stress and responsibility, especially in work. So I'm just not going to do that and do things on my own. And then when I started to think about it, it was like, this kind of makes sense. And this kind of makes sense not just for me, but for other people who are in similar positions where it makes sense to like work to increase like profit every year, or work to make enough money to support yourself and your family or the team that you work with, however big or small they are. But at some point, it doesn't make sense to keep going because it requires too many resources and too much to maintain. And there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of weight to that. Like I don't want the weight of having to be responsible for like a full-time employee or a set of employees. But that's different for everybody, right? Like it's just I'm just showing like one option for people as opposed to like here's the way you go. I think the book is really the challenge of there really isn't one path. There really isn't one version of success. There really isn't one way to do things in business. Here's one option. Take what you want from it, leave what you want from it, but there is another way. So just consider it.
Well, and you talk about like in the book, and this is something as I went through it, I kept going back to my roots at Costco. And I talk about this a little bit when I talked to Michael Gerber about this and when we talked about his Beyond the E-Myth stuff and the idea of turnkey, right? You know, like Costco is a really big, I mean, and you've spent we talked about Costco last time we were hanging out, you know, like, and I did actually make the trip up there. It was actually pretty smooth. There was parking even. So,
oh, wow.
On a Saturday, no less. It actually worked out pretty well. But, you know, as I was going through this, and the idea that you can, and you talk about this in the book, the idea that you can foster a company, the ethos or the philosophy of a company of one within larger organizations, if you know, with the right systems and with the right mindset, right? I mean, I kept thinking about, you know, like Costco's I mean, there are certain things that you do within the confines of Costco that allow you to empower, you know, employees that just want to stay. Like my buddy who was in my wedding party. He's been a forklift driver since day one, has no interest in climbing up the scale to go beyond that. He's given small initiatives to spearhead, but he's not in charge of any major projects or anything like that. Whereas there's other people that, you know, they have a massive, philosophy of promoting from within as well. So I mean, can you talk a little bit about, for the listener that's out there going, yeah, you know, this is all great, but I work, like I have a business, either that I've already started and it's kind of spiraling a little bit beyond you know, what I'm able to manage, or they work for a larger company and they're like, how do I implement this kind of thing? Or is there a way that I can implement this kind of thing in my larger, you know, organization?
For sure. And that's something that I thought of throughout the book, is that the company of one is, like you said, it's more of a mindset. Just like Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week isn't meant to be taken literally. He doesn't work 4 hours a week.
No, he's stated this many times that it sells books, but yeah, it's more, again, for those who haven't really know it, it just feels like you work it. Like the actual hours of work are accumulate to about 4 hours. So that's the idea behind it. But yeah, it's a philosophy what you're talking about.
Exactly. And so company of one is more of a mindset challenging growth and determining whether or not it's required. And even throughout the book, like some of the examples that I lean on the most are Basecamp and Buffer, and their businesses of like 50, 60, 70 people. Even my own business, I have about 5 people that I work with, all freelance. I don't want to be responsible for managing them, but I still work with a team. And I think it would be incredibly hard to run a business long term as just a single operator, because there's just so much you need to do. And there's so much that you would need to focus on. I would rather outsource the things that I'm either not good at or don't want to get good at. Like, I think everybody, like if you run a business, you probably have an accountant if your business is making like a full-time living. And that's a form of like hiring out where they're not an employee of your business. They don't have to be. Same with my lawyer. He doesn't have to be an employee of the company. I just need to lean on him when I have random contract questions about the companies that I work with in the States who have ridiculously long contracts. So I think it's more of a mindset that you can kind of apply to any type of work where you focus on things like how to become more resilient, how to become more autonomous, how to move faster by reducing extraneous processes, and how to simplify as well, how to create simple rules for processes or systems that become easier to manage, faster to manage, and can solve problems without just always adding more to the mix. Because adding more to solve any business problem, I think, is probably the easiest, but it's rarely the best.
Is there a solution to BC's opioid crisis? Join leading experts for the latest installment of UBC Okanagan Debates as we explore diverse perspectives on BC's drug emergency. October 29th at the Kelowna Community Theatre. Get your tickets at ok.ubc.ca/debates.
Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today. We're going to take a break from the proceedings now to talk about a sponsor for this episode, and that sponsor is Blinkist. It's one of my favorite apps that I use every single day. And the reason I use it is because time is of the essence when it comes to reading, and I want to be able to distill information down to its barest essentials when it comes to nonfiction books that I want to read. Now, when you say to yourself that you don't think you have time to read or develop yourself, that's simply not the case. There's that old quote, saying I don't have time is like saying I don't want to. And Blinkist gives you the ability to have the time because you do want to read and you want to develop yourself. Now, Blinkist is the only app that takes the best key takeaways, the need-to-know information from thousands of nonfiction books, and condenses them down into just 15 minutes so you can read or listen to them. It's made for busy people like you. That's what Blinkist offers. So if you want to get the main points of the books quickly without reading the entire book, that's what Blinkist offers. And it has an audio feature as well. So you can finish 4 books a day while you are on the go. 8 million people can't be wrong. They're all using Blinkist right now, and it's got a massive and growing library from self-help, business, health to history books, all that. Paul's book, one of Paul's books, Everything I Know, is in Blinkist. I really like Blinkist because it allows me to kind of preview books that I may want to dig into much deeper. And it reminds me of those, those old days, and this is going to date me, but when you used to go into a record shop and you could preview an entire album based on the single that you heard. You don't want to necessarily buy the whole album. So you put on the headphones by the stanchion in the in the record store, and you're listening and you're saying, oh, you know what? There's enough in here that I want to buy the album. That's what Blinkist offers for me. And it also allows me to get the basic information and the deeper information from books. So I've listened to a bunch of books on Blinkist. I've been a member for a really long time, and I can't say enough great things about the app. You actually are going to get a ton of value out of Blinkist. And right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for Productivity's podcast listeners. So if you go to Blinkist.com/timecrafting, you can start your free 7-day trial today. Now that's Blinkist. It's spelled Blinkist.com/timecrafting, and you can start your free 7-day trial. So it's Blinkist.com/timecrafting. You head there, you get your free 7-day trial. So you can get books like I've read, How to Win Friends and Influence People, The Power of Habits, Becoming by Michelle Obama. If you want to read her new book, get some of the takeaways, Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, so many others. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, Getting Things Done by David Allen, who's been a guest on the show. There's no time like the present to start building a reading habit. And Blinkist lets you do that in spades. So again, go to Blinkist.com. That's Blinkist.com/timecrafting to start your 7-day free trial today. I'd like to thank Blinkist for sponsoring this episode of the Productivityist podcast. And now let's get back to the show. As I was going through the book, and I've been thinking about this more lately. Again, this is why this book came along at the right time. It's not that we don't hang out and talk about this, but we don't sit here and talk when we hang out. It's not. I don't go, hey Paul, let me pick your brain on all of this stuff, because now it's in a book. So now you can now you can pick it up and read it. But as I was going through it, putting together the podcast episode, I thought, I remember when I had someone that was doing show notes dedicated solely to doing the podcast stuff, which, and as I'm, how, again, these things enter your mind as you're, sometimes either, we talked about this before we start recording, either the message shows up consistently to the point where you can't ignore it, or it just kind of seeps its way in. And I kept thinking, I remember when I had someone doing the podcast stuff, in a dedicated fashion in terms of the actual show notes and putting everything together. So that way, all I did was record it. I had the producer that put it together, John, who is a fantastic producer, but he just basically edits the episodes and puts them together. But show notes, all that stuff is not his thing. And I thought, I'm sitting here doing all of this work on a Wednesday, my audio day, and I'm thinking, why am I doing this right now? And it comes back to, and I want you to speak to this. It's the simple systems need to be simple, but in many cases, it's not easy to simplify. Does that make sense? Like, it's not easy.
It totally does.
Yeah. Can we, I'll give you my story. Maybe you've got an example that you want to share, but I remember when I first had the person doing show notes, I didn't sit down initially because everything was moving so quick. I'm like, I just need someone. Okay. So here's kind of what I do. And here's kind of and then all of a sudden the leaks in the bucket started to show up. We're like, oh, right, I need to do this. Now this time, as I'm reading Company of One, like, okay, hold on. I know I want to hire somebody. I'm going to go look and see if that person that used to do it is still available. Oh, they are. That was step one. Now, step two is not, step two is to ask them if they'd still be interested. Yes, they are. Great. Step 3, can I afford them? Yes. Step 4, let's write down the actual things I want. Like, let's build the workflow. Let's do it from soup to nuts. Not, okay, let's insert them in and then let's see where they fill in the gaps. And I think that's that step that is, it simplifies it, but it's the thing that you say, well, I don't have time to sit down to do that. This is a waste of my time. Can you give some examples of you setting, because as soon as I do it right, it's now set in stone. The time up front spent on it is going to save me not just time, but energy, money, mental bandwidth, all that stuff later. Can you give me an example of either personally where you had to do something like this, where you caught yourself and you're like, oh, right, this is where the mess up was, or maybe an example that you during your research for the book where this showed up?
Yeah, I mean, simplification means that you do a bit more work up front to save time later. That's really what it is. And even just thinking about like the way that I market, like it takes and I use mostly email marketing because I love email marketing. And that takes, like, in order to set up a sequence that includes personal things. So it's like a choose your own adventure, but for email. So if somebody clicks something, they get a different email next. If somebody fills in a survey in the email sequence, then they might get a different response. That all takes time to set up, and that all takes time to test. But then once I have that set up, I can use that and not have to worry about it, or I can use that and I can scale that without growth. So it takes me just as long to write an article and send it to you, one person, as it does for me to write an article and send it to a list of 30,000 people.
Right.
Like, the technology exists to do that. And this is just one example. And this is why I love email marketing, where I can focus on things that can scale in volume, but that don't require, like, I don't have to hire an extra 6 people if my mailing list grows by like another 5,000 or 10,000 people. Like, it takes the same amount of work. So I'm always looking for things like that. Marshall Haas, the guy who runs NeedWant, he does things the same way, where he initially, and they sell like really nice iPhone cases and a couple other like iPhone plugs and that sort of thing. And initially he was like, well, if I want to have an 8-figure business, I'm going to need to hire a lot of people and I'm going to need to grow the team with the revenue. And then as he was doing it, and he comes from a tech background, he was like, well, what can I do to like scale the business without growing it? And he started to lean on things like email, things like targeted ads, things like automating customer support. So you could have like knowledge bases or video explainers or that sort of thing. And now he's like, I can probably scale the revenue in this up like 10%, 100% while barely growing my team. I think he has a team of like 5 people and they make well into the millions, like way past $1 million, because he's focused on things that can do that, where the solutions are simple, but they're not easy.
Right.
So he took a lot of time to set up, but once they're set up, then they can be scaled without having the growth required. Like in the past, growth would be required to scale. That's why we have mega corporations, or that's why like assembly lines existed, where if you wanted to pump out more widgets, you would hire more workers. Nowadays, you don't really need to do that in a lot of situations. Obviously, not all situations, but there's ways to scale without growth. And I mean, the book definitely talks about that a lot as well, where it kind of makes sense to do that in some cases.
How often do you audit your automations and processes? Because this is one of the things that I think can put people off. And I know that I love, tools like Zapier, and I love Process Street, and I love, again, to have the tech tools and even just checklists, that say, hey, here's every step of the way, because, you want to break down projects to their smallest particles. I touch on this a little bit with James Clear on a recent episode of the show. But I think one thing that freaks people out, especially if they are not tech savvy, is what if the automation breaks? What if I set this up, or I set up too many and I can't, the problem doesn't become keeping track of employees or tasks, it becomes keeping track of automations. Do you have a way that you say, okay, I'm going to look at this, I've got a weekly check where I go and look at all my automations, or do you have a set amount? Like, where does that, do you have like kind of a nice benchmark for looking at that stuff? Because I think that's helpful for people who want to be productive and know that scaling into this in this way makes sense. But what if my Gmail filter breaks and I don't know that it's not working, or my Zap's like, oh no, now all of the things I've set up with Zapier aren't working because the app I was using changed its API and it broke everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, I typically check once a quarter. So the first day of the quarter, I check those things for my automation specifically. But I mean, I think for all of the projects that I do, even new ones, I don't scale until it hurts.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to build a 50 email sequence that ties into Zapier and Typeform and Stripe and PayPal initially. I'm just going to say, like, email me, or like, here, I'm just going to start emailing people one-on-one, or start having Skype calls with them one-on-one until I can no longer handle that. Then I'm going to build like 1 or 2 email sequence, like just in MailChimp, start 2 emails. One's that giving information and 2's probably a follow-up. And then once that starts to work, then build it more. Like I've never started a project with a big system. Like, I want to build systems as I need to, because I think a lot of times people kind of lose that initial, like, I think a lot of products work because the creator has spent a whole lot of time in the beginning focused on the one-on-one, right, until they could no longer do that. Like, even Danielle Laporte's a great example from the book, where I think she did like 500 or 1,000 one-on-one Firestarter session phone calls before she wrote the ridiculously best-selling Firestarter Sessions book.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, she talked to hundreds of people before she made a product.
And then eventually got to the point where there were other people she had to certify other people at one point, or the company did, so that other people could
now
do
Desire
it, right?
Map has has programs where you can be certified, but it didn't start out that way. Nope. It wasn't the like massive thing as step one. Step one was like, who can I talk to? Who do I know? Start on day one. Like, those are things you can do the first day. Those are things you can do in the beginning as well to make money. Like, if I offer a one-on-one service, I can start offering that right now. Like, I can get off the phone with you and offer a one-on-one service. If I'm building a product that requires like 50 moving parts and ties into all of these other services, require API keys, that's going to take months to build, years to build. Like, that's going to take so long to build.
Yeah.
Why not just start? And then all of the knowledge and all the information that you get from working with people one-on-one, from learning from them, by like listening to what they're struggling with. That's all going to be useful as you're scaling this thing, as you're building these automations, and then it's going to be more authentic because you can speak to that type of customer because you know them. If you don't know them, it's just going to be emails like, why am I getting this email? What is this person talking about? That wasn't a problem I had. Why are they talking about that?
Well, then everything becomes testing in that respect too, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, we're going to take a break from the show now to talk about a sponsor for this episode, Skillshare. Now, I am a huge fan of Skillshare. I've been using them for a really long time. I actually have a class there called Productivity Habits That Stick, using time theming with nearly 30,000 people that are taking that class. But there's lots of other productivity classes that are on Skillshare because, it's just a great online learning community where you can learn a whole bunch of different skills, whether it's productivity, whether it's SEO, social media. I've taken some Instagram classes on there. I learned how to use elements of ConvertKit, which is one of the tools I use for email. I've learned how to use Sumo, which is another tool that I've used. So I can get very specific with the tools that I'm using. And the great thing about Skillshare is that you've got experts that are really niching down into these very specific classes. For example, I wanted to learn about Notion, which is one of the hottest productivity apps right now. I'm not a huge guy when it comes to apps any longer, but when I see an app that's really pushing it, I definitely want to get into it. Notion's one of them. If you were to go into Skillshare and type in Notion, which I will actually do right now as we're recording this, I'm gonna type in Notion, and boom, Dalton Fabian, planning your Skillshare class with Notion. So that's something I'm gonna actually bookmark that right now. We've got Francesco D'Alessio, who's a friend of mine. He has the Beginner's Guidebook to Notion, a great class. He's got other classes too, so I can go and say, hey, I want to see what else Francesco is teaching. And he is teaching classes on Things 3, how to use Bare Notes, how to use Trello. There's a variety of great teachers on here. There's a variety of great skills you can learn. You can take classes in a variety of areas. So whether you're looking to discover a new passion, you're just simply curious, you want to start a side business or a side hustle, you want to gain new professional skills, Skillshare will give you that opportunity in spades. It's a clean website. There's the mobile app that you can learn on the go. I believe that if you stop learning, then you stop living. And Skillshare allows you to learn in a variety of different ways every single day. Now, you can join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare right now, just with this special offer that is available to Productivity's podcast listeners. All you need to do to get 2 months of Skillshare for free is to go to Skillshare.com/timecrafting, and you can get started with your 2 months of unlimited access to 25,000 classes, over 25,000 classes for absolutely free. So you've got 60 days, 2 months to dive in. Depending on when you're listening to this, you could have a little bit more than that, depending on the months, but you dive in and you can learn a lot over that 60-day period. If you're like me and you take my time theming class, maybe you choose a couple of days where those are your days to focus on learning, and Skillshare is where you're going to go to do that. You can learn a lot in 60 days, and Skillshare is going to give you that opportunity. So again, to sign up, go to Skillshare.com/timecrafting, and you can start your 2 months for free now. Skillshare.com/timecrafting. I'd like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this episode of the Productivityist podcast. And now let's get back to the show. And the thing that you also bring into light in the book, which, I think that not many people, well, I'm being too general, but I think this becomes a point of confusion, or a point of blissful ignorance for some entrepreneurs, is we already have people that are following us, or that love our stuff. Hence, like, again, yesterday, the Instagram compliment that I got that said, hey, can you do more Instagram content on this? Then they said, oh, I love your stuff. Like, to get that's qualitative feedback, as opposed to, oh, but look, my Instagram is like, I need to have more followers on there. Mm-hmm. The idea that you people will search for more followers, more a larger email list, which you touch on in the book as well, as opposed to the people that are already there. Why do you think? I think that's a problem personally. That it's just, again, that the old way of doing things. More is better. People used to be more concerned about, like, hey, oh, you have 30,000 Twitter followers. yeah, but most of them are robots,
Yeah.
as opposed to, oh, but look, there's 15 like it's the second generation of followers that really matters, right? On tools like that, because that's where it's more reach than necessarily individual followers. Why do we get so caught up in those metrics? And how do we avoid that? Like oh, I need to build my list, in terms of, numerical growth as opposed to, qualitative growth.
Yeah. And I mean, all those things you touched on are really just like vanity metrics. Like they look good to other people. And I mean, they can be useful, like even in getting a book deal. Like
right.
They wanted to know how many people I had on my list, how many people followed me. And like, that's useful. It's not useful for my business. It's useful for like social proof.
or for big companies that's the metrics that they need to use because it's the way business has been done, which is why I love seeing things like KPIs and OKRs show up, because those can be forged by people saying, hey, we're going to look at this again, a process, like some kind of sequence put in place saying, hey, our OKRs are based on, not necessarily how many buildings we build, but buildings that we build in this very specific area because this is where we want to focus. Or, having less customer service complaints than we've had in the years past, right? Like things like that. But most people are still stuck on the how many people, how much money are you bringing in? Because that's the other thing, is that we get caught in that. And I mean, it's a trap. It's a trap.
Yeah. I mean, gross numbers never really tell the whole story because how can they? They're
right.
just a single number. But the other thing is that, like, I think if we determine what metrics make the most sense for our business, and I think sometimes there can be and I mean, James Clear wrote about this on his blog and in Atomic Habits as well, about defining upper bounds. Because, for example, the best example I have of this is my mailing list. Like my mailing list needed to grow from zero because this is what I wanted to use to be the financial driver of my business. So it needed to grow, but at a certain point, more growth doesn't make sense, because the reason why my newsletter works is because I'll send it an email. It goes to 30,000 people, and then a couple hundred people reply typically. And I can see like, okay, well, if most of the time I get about 200 replies, this article got 10. This isn't something my audience is interested in. Probably not going to write about it again. If I get 1,000 replies, be like, this is a topic that people care about. Like maybe there's a product here. Maybe there's a book. There is a book here. I wrote about probably 3 years ago, I wrote an article called Maybe I Don't Care About Growth, or I Don't Care About Growth. I think I was more hard-nosed about it. And I got more replies from any article that I've ever written.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, that's the book. Like 100%, I took that. I was like, this is the book. If my audience was like, instead of 30,000, it was 300,000 or 3 million, there's no way that I could go through all of the emails. Like there's no way I could reply to people and have conversations with people. And the reason why my business does well is because I get to know my customers. Mm-hmm. Like we have conversations. If somebody buys something from me, I typically recognize their name or email because maybe we've had a conversation on Twitter. Maybe they've replied to an email. So my audience has grown to a size where it can support my business because it needs profit. And it's also not so big. Like I don't need to focus on growth beyond a certain amount because it doesn't serve my business. And I think when companies or when creators focus on retention over acquisition, it's really short-sighted because it costs, I think it's like 5 to 7 times more to get a new customer than to retain an existing customer. I'm like, nuts to that. I just want to retain all my customers. I would rather make products for the people who are already buying from me and just serve them over a lifetime instead of just like, I just got to churn and burn this list. And like, you're either going to buy it this week or you're going to unsubscribe. And in doing so, I would need like 1,000 more people a day to keep that business sustainable.
And the same principles apply to people that you're working with. It costs you way more to hire than to retain, right? Which is why, you've got people that like, again, you talk about Buffer in the book and there's, how they operate. And then you've got the, so I can't remember what business you talk about specifically, but there's different ways that companies that are bigger can manage to allow for this to happen, not just with their customers and the clients they serve, but with the employees that they're engaging with, like the idea of, row, the idea where, and as a night owl, I can completely appreciate that because, when you're like, hey, it doesn't matter when you work, it just matters how you work. That's like, and what the outcomes, the results. And again, this is where things like KPIs and OKRs and all this stuff can come into play but it comes back to like staying small, like the idea of if you can do that, then it becomes more manageable. And I think what happens in bigger businesses, and I can again speak this is one of the, I mean, again, Costco's all about retention, their membership, right? That's where most of their money comes from. But even those bigger companies, if you don't have people buying into it, then there's leaks that show up. And then all of a sudden you have to say, okay, well, where do we go from here? Right. You know, so I think that there comes a point, like you said, where, and you talked about this with your list, where if you get to a certain point, and I know in the book you talk about, James, the same thing, where it's like, okay, nothing really changes in terms of the numbers that we're growing. So let's make the list better, not bigger, but better.
Mm-hmm.
And I, again, you know, the more I went through this book, and again, this is a reread for me for sure, because this is the company I'm building. And funnily enough, you know, I've been through the arguments. Many people have. You have too, where it's like, you know, oh, I should build this thing, or, oh, I should hire this person, or, oh, and sometimes it's through altruistic means, right? Like I would love to hire more people to be able to have them live, you know, to be able to say, oh, wow, that they can have some of the freedom that we experience. But I think that ultimately, doing that for the sake of doing that is not smart, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like my biggest expense for my business is freelancers. Like
Right.
if I took out paying freelancers, I spent a couple $1,000s on software and that's it.
Yeah.
Like I replace my laptops and my computers probably once every 5, 6, 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I still feel like we can, like I can't, economy is still like building and driving jobs for sure. Like this is how it used, like large companies are such a tiny blip, minuscule blip on the radar of commerce. Like the way that it used to work is that it was just a whole bunch of interconnected artisans and crafts people making stuff. And I think we can get back to that, but also use technology to really kick it up a notch. And I think that way still empowers and supports like a really strong economy. And like it or not, like big companies are losing people to freelancing.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they start to adopt some of these things we're talking about, or unless they start to see the value in them, they're going to keep losing people. And like you said, it costs so much more to keep hiring new people, like the strain on HR and training and getting people up to peak productivity in a job. It takes so much time and costs companies so much money. If they can work to retain their staff a lot better, it's cheaper in the long run. If you just keep your employees happy and they're just going to keep wanting to work for you.
Paul, this has been great. And, you know, I encourage anyone who is either in a business where they have some autonomy, they can go, you know what, let's, even if they're running a department. I remember doing a workshop once where someone wanted to use a specific tool, but their boss didn't like it. They had ran a team like, well, you and the team run the tool, and then show them that the results. And then, I mean, money, you know, the numbers, the bottom line talks to people in those positions of management, because that's where they're getting, you know, that's where they're getting, they're getting evaluated. So, I mean, there's, whether you work in a bigger business or you're like, hey, you know what? I want to build my own company, and you get the allure, because this is where a lot of it comes from the online world of, you know, oh, I'm building this, or I've got this, or I'm hitting these figures and all that stuff. This book will help you kind of keep it in check a bit, but also not in a way that what I loved about it is it's not a dream killing book either. It's like, well, no, you know what? If you scale too big, then no, it's like just about scaling the right way. And if you need to look no further, and again, I've hung out with Paul on many occasions, to see what Paul's built, both with this book and in his own, you know, we'll go to your website. We'll link to that in the show notes to know that this works. So Paul, where can people pick up this book, and where can people learn more about your work and keep up with what you're doing as you continue to go along the path of this company of one that you've built?
Yeah, so I mean, the best way to keep in touch is my newsletter, the Sunday Dispatches. If you Google Paul Jarvis, I'm the first couple pages in Google or whatever search engine you use. And you'll link to pjrvs.com. Nobody remembers that, so there's no point saying it, really. And then the book Company of One is available pretty much everywhere, worldwide, on book repository, something like that. And then on Amazon in digital, physical, and audio format. And it's in North America, I'm the one narrating it. For some reason, there's a different narrator for the rest of the world, but they actually sound good. So I'm not actually that sad about it. So yeah, the book's out everywhere. Jan 15, North America, Jan 17, rest of the world.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode. You can find all of the relevant links and resources at mikevardy.com/podcast578. Of course, you can do that wherever you get your podcasts as well. The show note links are right there. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. But while you're looking at those various apps and consuming podcasts, why not add this podcast to your other catalog of podcasts that you listen to? Subscribing in Spotify allows for you to comment and share thoughts that way. Apple Podcasts, you can leave ratings and reviews, but making sure that you don't miss a single episode of what's to come is super helpful. And subscribing to the podcast allows you to do that. YouTube, again, there's engagement there as well. So I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. It is one way to support the show, and also ensures that you can find whatever episodes you're looking for in the over 575 episodes of this show over the years, as well as make sure that you don't miss a single episode of Flashback Friday episodes like this, the PM Talks series that we have once per month with my good friend Patrick Rohn, and fresh, shiny new episodes, which you will be getting next week as well. In fact, next week, we will be offering our first PM Talks of season 2. So I encourage you to subscribe to the show, and that way you won't miss that. Another way to support the show is to check out the sponsors you heard interspersed throughout our conversation today. mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors, where you can check them out. Click on links of those that resonate with you, and that way they know that we sent you. That is it for this episode of A Productive Conversation. Thanks for joining me. I hope you got a lot out of this conversation. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.